Jun Shan Yin Zhen, Silver Needles of Mount Jun. Dongting Lake divides the provinces of Hubei and Hunan in south-central China. It is one of China's 5 Great Lakes and famous to Chinese culture for 2 main reasons. The first reason is that Dongting Lake was where dragon boat racing originated. More importantly, in relation to tea, there is an island known as Jun Shan in the northern part of this lake. Jun Shan is tiny, at not even like 1 square kilometer. And tea produced there grows on only 0.25 kilometers square, or about 25 hectares of its land. The tea grows in sandy lake soils, only 20 meters above sea level, and has never seen fertilizers or pesticides, as there is no need for them. The tea grows at its own pace among the natural forest ecosystem, which covers nearly 75% of the island. Jun Shan Yin Zhen has been in production since the 1700s or so, originally cultivated by Buddhist monks of the island's temple. The tea varietal which creates Jun Shan Yin Zhen is called Jun Shan Kun Ti Zhong. That was probably a horrible pronunciation, which has become localized to the island and has fairly large buds when comparing it to other tea varietals out there. So Yin Zhen is a picking criteria. So just as spring starts to arrive, the tea bush will start to produce its new flush of leaves. The unopened bud, which contains the leaves, is called the yin zhen, or the silver needle. In the case of a yin zhen tea, this is all that's picked, just the buds. If yin zhen was not picked in time, it will eventually open up into a leaf and reveal the next baby silver needle inside. As the bush grows, the next silver needle will open up, and you'll have a total of 2 leaves and 1 bud. Picking it around this time is when you start to change the terminology. You'll call this mudan, with 1 bud or 2 leaves, or even 1 bud and 1 leaf. And after this, you can call it gongmei and shoumei as it gets older. But we don't really need to get into that. We're talking about silver needles here. Depending on the variety of the tea bush, the young leaves will more or less be covered by a soft white or perhaps silver-colored fur, which we call pico. An immaculate bud picked from a tea bush with a high amount of furs would indeed appear to be a shimmering silver color, hence where its name silver needle comes from. There are several lists of famous Chinese tea. These lists generally manifest in the form of, I guess, Jun Shan Yin Zhen being among like the top 3. It's probably the only yellow tea that appears on any of them. And you can think of yellow tea as sort of intermediary between white and green, although that might be oversimplifying the process a little bit. In the processing of yellow tea, there is a step which involves covering the tea, the leaves, with a hot, wet blanket, and you're trying to sweat the leaves underneath. This process is known in Chinese as meng huang. Perhaps in English, smothering is just a word that's appropriate to use. This smothering process gives a dull yellow color to otherwise white or greenish leaves. And there are several noteworthy yellow teas in China. A lot of them coming from Sichuan. You have some from Zhejiang, you have some from Hubei. Hunan as well is probably the area where you're going to find most of them, other than Sichuan. But in the picking of these teas, the criteria for what you pick and when you smother, they're different. So when you do the smothering is pretty crucial to what flavors you ultimately get. But this is all kind of dictated by local tradition, and things like that. So in the standard processing of Chinese green tea, the leaves are picked from the bush, perhaps slightly withered. They're fried in a wok and to kind of kill the enzymes responsible for oxidation. They're rolled and shaped and either mostly dried or rested before drying completely, or they're just dried completely after rolling. In the processing of yellow tea, the smothering step will be carried out either after the initial parching, or the rolling, or the preliminary drying. That is the choice of the manufacturer. In the processing of Jun Shan Yin Zhen, this process is carried out twice and is known as twice baked, twice smothered. This is what makes this different from everything else. Jun Shan Yin Zhen is classically picked, parched, dried, smothered, dried again, smothered again, and finished with a final drying. There are different grades of finished teas. That is not to say the difference is higher skill or through neglect in the processing. There are certain permissible amounts of differently sized buds or damaged pieces to be allowed in certain grades. For a tea to be at the highest possible grade, you should expect, and you'll pay dearly for it, an extreme level of consistency in both the leaf size and this flawless appearance. That's not to say that the broken leaf will taste inferior. It is the high-paying consumers' every right to buy a product that they consider perfect and to kind of spend money to take away imperfections, however insignificant those things might seem to other people, just with additional cost. Giving tea as a gift is a very respectable option in Eastern Asia, and what could be better than receiving this authentic Junshan Island tea with all of these wonderful things I just talked about, especially in an immaculate sort of level of production and sorting. Well, probably on the buyer's end, paying less for it, and on the drinker's end, one that tastes just as good. So to drink what was authentic Jun Shan Yin Zhen was to truly be drinking one of the most prestigious teas in the world. Unfortunately, for us in the Western world, news travels kind of slowly, and misinformation is everywhere. If you had noticed, I said authentic, and I used past tense. That might concern you, because authentic Jun Shan Yin Zhen was only made on the island of Junshan. Patents on cultural names and styles of tea, they're not new, and up until 2016, there was only one company legally entitled to produce authentic Jun Shan Yin Zhen, and that was the Hunan Tea Company. But the Hunan Tea Company's patent expired, and it was deemed ineligible for renewal. And without a patent protecting the product, they decided to quit production and leave the island. This has enabled production of Junshan Yin Zhen tea by other producers. But as the island's bushes can only produce about 500 kilograms of tea per year, anything produced on the island is still out of reach for the majority of the world. But before the Hunan Tea Company stopped production, their world-renowned Junshan Yin Zhen would fetch prices at least 3 to 4 times more than the sales price of the one that I'm selling on my shop. These days, the island's tea production is confusing. The quality of tea is nowhere near what it used to be. It's actually quite remarkably bad compared to the old days, as far as I'm told. And the new producers are not really following the processing of what made Junshan Yin Zhen different from its competition, what made it famous. Sometimes it's not even considered yellow tea. They can make it as green tea. But alas, due to the fame created in the hundreds of years before, the tea costs pretty much the same price, sometimes even more. And with the Hunan Tea Company being gone from the island, the only, can I say, authentic Jun Shan Yin Zhen that exists anymore will be made by the people who left and to start their little farms elsewhere, who are carrying on that sort of original tradition. There are deals to be had, and surely other great teas to drink in the vast market of replicas and the forgeries that Jun Shan Yin Zhen has inspired. These teas are produced in the very confusingly Junshan district, just north of where the island is on the mainland. And yeah, compared to what they were doing on the island, I mean, just the age of the tea bushes is different. Pesticide use and that sort of thing is not going to be uncommon there. The varietals of the tea bushes are different as well, very likely. And you can, of course, you can get those teas for a much, much lower price. But if you stay true to the authentic production method and I guess what made it famous, these teas should still be very enjoyable. Like there's quite literally 1 billion people in China who would love to drink this tea, and 1 billion people who would never be able to afford to drink this tea, and 1 billion people who would have no idea whether the Jun Shan Yin Zhen they've drank was authentic or not. And ironically, I'm kind of in the same boat. Having not been to Jun Shan myself or in contact with the manufacturer directly, I place a lot of trust in my source of this tea. Seeing as he's taught me all of which I just said to you, I do trust him, and I do have to spend a lot of money for his tea. But then there's that question I asked earlier on, like, what could be better than receiving authentic Junshan tea? It's, yeah, probably one that's produced in that style, carries the signature taste and aroma, one which represents sort of substance over style. And this tea is all of those things. Jun Shan Yin Zhen has a subtle flavor that I might describe as custardy and somewhat similar to honeydew melon, brown sugar, and bean sprouts. There's a traditional way to brew this tea, which is something like a ritual, and this video is more or less taken to describe that to you. You use a Collins glass, or you use a tall sort of flute-shaped vessel, and you put your tea in the bottom, you add water to that, and you get to watch this beautiful dance where in the beginning, some of the buds, they float at the top of the water, some of the buds at the bottom, they sink, but then you see them exchange places. And only really when about 75% of the original floating leaves drop down to the bottom is the tea really ready to be consumed. And if you were to go to this island, there's somewhat of a pilgrimage that you would do, which is you go in the morning in the fog with a bowl, and you're going to collect as much dew from lotus flowers as you can. And this would be a very, very yang water. It's very pure. It's very, in a spiritual sense, it's very high energy water. It hasn't been sitting around for very long. You know, this water really just came from the sky. It's very active. And you would collect this water enough to make a cup of tea. You would get those leaves. You would sit out on a rock on the island in the fog, and you would drink this tea and have this sort of moving experience. Well, you know, where I am right now is the middle of a city. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. And we don't have a whole lot of fog here. We don't have lakes. We don't have lotus flowers. Really nothing that I could really easily recreate this situation with. But I do think that I have a way. And this can be done in the cafe where I'm at. On the screen here, you've been seeing this. I would propose the modern version of this tea is to try to get water which can emulate this really, really high yang lotus water. And well, the way that we would do that is either collecting rainwater, which means going outside the city, Not super easy. I mean, it's not hard, I guess, but um, you wouldn't want to collect rainwater and drink that in the city. So the bottled water on the left, that's called berg. So this is melted from icebergs. It is made in Newfoundland, Canada. So it's quite far away from where I'm at, but I can buy this and have it shipped over here. Very extremely soft water with virtually no minerality whatsoever, and a pH orientation which is between neutral and alkaline, giving the water a hint of sweetness, which I think really plays excellently off of the tea. A Portuguese egg custard tart is probably the best possible pairing that you could have with this tea. I think these things are meant to be together. Ultimately, this experience would be something like $60, which is kind of crazy. It is crazy, but I don't think many other people in the world who will be able to pull this off. Not only to get berg, I mean, you just have to order that, but if you're using, let's say, an iron kettle, I have an iron kettle as well, you're going to add iron into this extremely pure water that you're sourcing very specifically. You'll ruin the whole point of the thing. So you need to have a silver kettle, okay? Silver does not react with water at all, neither does gold. But a golden kettle is $15,000. Silver kettle is at least $3,000, but generally more, 4,000, 5,000 could be. So where are you going to go that has a silver kettle, that has iceberg water, that has this tea, that is going to also have a Portuguese egg tart? Well, this is something that maybe you can do for yourself, but at what cost, really? It's going to be a lot more than 60. So I hope one day, if you watch this video to the end, this is something that might interest you. It is something that off the camera now, I'm going to sit down and love for the next 10 minutes and savor every bite. But thank you for watching, and bye for now.